record right now.
That's really great.
Okay,
And
great.
lots of people are coming in now. This is wonderful.
David, can I ask you something?
Yes, go ahead.
There's Dylan Percival Maxwell that he's out. Do you know why? Or
Yes, he was asked to leave the race yesterday by the party. This is Dylan, and there were some comments quoted in the newspaper that the party felt wasn't appropriate. So they asked him to leave the race. They related to the TV Ontario debate. And he was in the second panel. There were two panels, and there was an exchange towards the end about some of the comments he made. And I think that's why it was related to those comments in the TVO debate. And then also a newspaper story the next day in the National Observer. So we're down to 9 candidates now.
Yeah, actually, one of my colleagues here just alerted me to that yesterday.
I do think we have 9 fantastic candidates, though, so that's good. And I think we can emphasize the positive, a very, very diverse group, 5 women, 4 men, really interesting group of people. And I'm glad you're hosting them all on Zoom. That's fantastic for Toronto St. Paul's. Way to go.
Well, to be honest, we were a bit, when you sign into Gvote these days, there's all these messages about not using Gvote and EDA for partisan purposes during the electoral. So we were a little bit shell-shocked about how to handle it, but finally we decided after June 3rd, when all the candidates were officially named, we decided just to invite everybody. And,
that's great, really great. How about if we get started? Are we ready to go?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. And I'm Amanda Rosenstock. I am David's co-campaign manager and legal officer. I'm here in Toronto. So welcome, everybody. If you'd like to type your name and where you're from, you can do so in the chat box now. So David will start off with a 4 to 5 minute introduction. And then you can ask questions either by typing your question into the chat box or by raising your hand. I think we can manage both with our size of group, so that's good. All right, so David, did you want to start off?
Yes, I'll just jump right in with a 5 minute introduction, maybe 6, to welcome everybody. And then we'll turn it over to questions and answers, either raising your hand or in the chat box, as Amanda just said. I want to start by saying thank you to Adam and to everybody else who's helped to organize this call, Amanda and all the others. It's wonderful to have so many people coming out on a very hot night in Toronto, and I really appreciate that you're all here. I'm coming to you from Saanich, British Columbia, on the very southeast corner of our country, the riding of Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke. And this is the traditional territory of the Esquimalt, the Wisaniq, the Sequim, and the Sauk First Nations. And that's a very important thing to me. I went into law as a young man because I felt there had been a lot of injustice done to Indigenous people throughout our history, and that litigation and legislation would be ways to address those injustices. And it's been one of the themes in my career in law, is addressing injustice and making our justice system a better place for Canadians, and specifically for marginalized people. I live here with my wife and daughter, Rebecca, the youngest. My wife, Annemiek, and I met over a legal opinion in Ottawa when we were both young lawyers at the Department of Justice. And we had 4 daughters. 3 of them have moved on to other places, and Rebecca's still here with us going into grade 12 in September. I'm just going to introduce 3 quick ideas. One is about the future of Canada, one is about the future of our party, and one is about what I offer as a leadership candidate. Mais d'abord, j'aimerais dire à tous les francophones qui sont ici que vous êtes le bienvenu de me poser des questions en français si vous voulez. Je pense que c'est très important de reconnaître que nous sommes un pays bilingue et un parti bilingue. So, as I just said, feel free to ask me questions in both official languages, very glad to respond in English or French. So for Canada, what I'd love to see our country become is a leader among leaders. We have been a laggard on climate action. We've been a laggard on democratic reform. We can do better, and we know that we can do better. I'm convinced that the Green Party has some very doable, reasonable policies that would turn Canada into a leader. On climate action, even though we're the 4th largest producer of fossil fuels in the world, we have a very good plan on how to get off fossil fuels and onto renewables, and how to build an east-west electrical grid powered by renewables. On democratic reform, I'm convinced that proportional representation is a much, much more fair system of government, and I'd be glad to elaborate on that if people have questions. I think we need to become a country where no one is left behind, and there are too many people, COVID-19 has demonstrated this, there are too many people that are being left behind now in Canada. To change this, I'm also convinced that we need a Green Party that's credible. And the way to get credibility is to win seats in the House of Commons. And if we don't form a majority in the next election, then let's form the balance of power, so we have influence over the government in Ottawa. And to get there, we need to win seats. We need to be organized in 338 ridings across Canada. I'd say we're organized in maybe 20 or 25 ridings right now. I crossed the country in February and March to meet at the local level with riding associations. I was on my way to Toronto. I was in Cobourg, Ontario, actually, when COVID-19 struck. And so I didn't make it to Toronto for any meetings. It was unsafe by that time to hold meetings. I did fly out of Pearson. But I'm going to come and see you if I can get to Ontario in August or September, if the travel restrictions are lifted, because I believe that the way the Green Party will grow is through 338 enthusiastically staffed riding associations with volunteers who are really empowered. We have amazing volunteers across our country, people who are trained, electricians, engineers, PhDs. We have an unbelievable team of volunteers, but they're not able to reach their full potential in our party right now. And it wouldn't take much to really generate a ton of excitement and action. I'd love us at the local level to build a movement of movements. That's what we did here in our riding in Esquimalt-Saint-Suc. We came second in the last race. We got 26% of the vote, thanks to 200 volunteers who put up 2,000 lawn signs. And those are the kinds of numbers, I think, that would really transform our party at the riding level and nationally. So I'm just going to leave you with a couple of challenges. First, if each one of you on this call went and sold one membership, if we were able as a party to go from 23,000 members to 46,000 members, that would transform our party. So if each one of you could approach a family member or a neighbor or a friend and just ask, would you buy a $10 membership? Tell them we have a sale on today, it's only $10. But the key is to grow our party. We need to sell members, we need to get out and convince people to come in to join us. The second thing I'd say for Toronto, St. Paul and any other riding is to go to the people who took lawn signs and say to them, thank you. We really appreciate you taking a lawn sign. Now will you spend $10 and join the party and help us to make the most important decision we've taken in 14 years, which is who will be the new leader of the party. It's a great way to sell memberships, and those people who took lawn signs are most likely to buy a membership. That'll take organization, it'll take telephone teams, and once COVID-19 rules loosen up, it might even take door knocking if you go door to door to your sign folks. But that's how I see us in the next 3 months growing our membership and transforming our party. And last but not least, I'd ask you to go to davidmerner.com. And you will see on my website, if you want to get involved in our campaign, 2 very important buttons. One is the fun button, which is join the party. If you join the party and get involved in our campaign, you'll have a chance to really contribute to the future of the party and also have some fun. And secondly, there's the donate button. This button is key because it costs money to run our Zoom accounts, our calling system, our database. and to travel, to come and see you. So if you're able to donate, no matter how small the amount, I would really appreciate that. Again, it's davidmerner.com and click on donate. I'm just going to end with this. Here's what I offer to the party. I am a person who's campaigned for the Greens from Atlantic Canada to British Columbia. I've campaigned in Ontario for Mike Schreiner on his winning campaign, and in other points in between, federally, provincially, and even municipally, because we have municipal Greens running here in BC. I'm also a candidate who's campaigned extensively in French. I did my bar admission course in Ontario in French. I litigated for the Department of Justice in Ottawa and Quebec before federal courts and tribunals in French. But I also played on many hockey teams, Francophone hockey teams as the only Anglophone in Ottawa and Aylmer and Gatineau and other points. So I speak both kinds of French, and I think it's very important to have a leader who on day one can win a debate in French, win a leaders debate in French, talk to voters in a language they understand and that they can relate to. I don't think this is the kind of job where we should elect somebody who's going to be learning on the job. And that's a key difference between me and most of the other candidates. The last thing I'd say is it's very important to have a leader who can actually win the seat they ran in 2019. I'm the only candidate in the race who can actually win the seat he or she or they ran in the last campaign, and that's critical. If we elect a leader who can't win a seat, we have a problem that will need to be solved. So that's a very short summary of who I am, what I value. I'd love to have your questions. As Amanda said, feel free to type them into the chat box. You can find that by going to the bottom of your screen, clicking on chat, and then typing in your questions. Or just raise your hand and wave at Amanda, and she's going to handle the questions. So thank you very much again for coming. Thank you to the organizers, and over to you, Amanda.
All right, so we'll open it up to questions now. Who wants to go first? Ian.
Thanks, Amanda. So, David, if at the door you have you're canvassing, you have 2 minutes to answer a question before you lose their attention, and someone asks you, how is the Green Party of Canada different from the other three parties? What would you say?
I would say, and before I walk up to that door, Ian, what I would do is I'd look around and try and figure out what kind of neighborhood am I in? What kind of door is this? Who is likely to answer? Do I have a sense of what is important to the people in this neighborhood and behind this door? And if I see, you know, bicycles on the lawn or small shoes in the doorway, I change my pitch because everything relates to not what I want to say, but what they want to hear and need to hear. So a lot of it is about figuring out what's important to them. But in general, if somebody says that to me, and let's assume it's you, Ian, and you're saying that to me, right? What I'd say is the Green Party is very different. We're a party that has been very consistent on the most important issue facing human civilization, which is global warming. And I'd also say to you, Ian, are there key issues that you're concerned about? Are you concerned about global warming yourself? And then I would vary my answer depending on how you responded. So you're the person behind the door. I say, we've been very consistent on global warming. We've also been very progressive on social justice issues. And fiscal responsibility has been another key thing for our party, making sure that we don't make promises that we can't keep. That's a key thing for the Greens. We cost out our promises and we balance our budget and the platforms so we really know how much our promises cost and how much we're going to raise to pay for those promises. And Ian, are there important issues for you there? Do some of those things resonate with you?
So that's how you would answer the question.
Yeah, I would really try and start a dialogue. If we go to the doorsteps and lecture people, it's not going to work. We need to go to the doorsteps and listen to people. So what I try to do in the first, 30 seconds or even 15 seconds is to throw it open for conversation. Everybody knows the Greens have fought for the environment since we were founded. And so I usually start there because everybody starts nodding. We want to get the person on the doorstep nodding. But we really want to get the person on the doorstep also sharing with us what are their concerns. The polls say that, especially for seniors, health is the #1 issue. So if it's a senior on the doorstep, I would start talking about the health issues that they're facing. In the last campaign, we had a great platform on pharmacare, national pharmacare, on free dental, basic dental. So depending on who I'm talking to, I'll emphasize different parts of the platform, because it's not for us, I believe, to go and preach. It's for us to connect. The most important thing on the doorstep is to connect with the person you're talking to, not to go and preach at them. Does that resonate with you?
Well, it sounds very strategic.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't answer the question how we're different, because everything you said, and most of the other parties, maybe not all of them, but at least the NDP and the Liberals, I think, could say the same thing, right?
Okay.
I'm not asking for you to trash talk the other parties. I think that's the wrong approach. I really do. I think if we go down that path, there's no reward there.
Yeah.
So,
well, I see the key difference
challenge.
just between you and me. We're not on the doorstep, but we're here as people who really know the Green platform and really care about the Greens. I'd say to you here in this context, the big difference between us and the other parties is the other parties have consistently advocated small incremental changes. Even the NDP, we've been way ahead of the NDP on social justice issues. You know, we've advocated national pharmacare way before them. We advocated equal marriage way before the NDP. Just 2 weeks ago, Jagmeet Singh finally came on board on the guaranteed livable income. We've been campaigning on that since 1983. So I would say with all the other parties, including the NDP, we are far more progressive. We're about deep change now. And you don't see that in the other parties at all. And for the Liberals and Conservatives, we actually have a track record that we can compare our promises to their track record, especially the Liberals. They speak wonderfully about the environment, and then once elected, they systematically did the opposite. They adopted Stephen Harper's greenhouse gas targets after trashing them for 3 or 4 years. They bought a pipeline, and after saying they would have it properly reviewed by the National Energy Board, the courts had to send them back to do the review twice. So there's lots of ways we can differentiate ourselves on key issues with the parties, but the big issue, I believe, and I think this is borne out in the polling, is that people see the Greens as committed, honest, ethical. And we are ready to campaign on deep change in our economy, in how our government operates, in our social programs. And Canadians can see that. We are different. So that's between you and I, how I would differentiate ourselves between us and the other 3 parties. On the doorsteps, though, I wouldn't say that, because on the doorsteps, people aren't. People want to hear, you know, what they care about. Next question. Are there any questions in the chat box, Amanda?
There sure are. They're coming in. All right. So we'll go to the first one from Craig Richardson. He asks, to grow the Green Party, wouldn't it be better to have a leader from Toronto to win seats in Ontario?
Thank you, Craig, for that question. And Craig, I'd say that what we need is a leader who is most capable of winning seats nationally. Because if we have a leader that builds our party from the ground up, 338 ridings, a leader who's able to win his, her, or their own seat, and is able to grow our vote from 1.1 million to 2 million to 3 million, we will be much more effective. And I hope what people in Toronto will do is look at the leader with the best experience, the leader who's most likely to grow the party, because that will help most in Toronto as well. I'll just leave with one more idea, which is I believe the leader has to be able to win their seats. And the Toronto candidates at this time just won't be able to win their seats. They won't be able to go from 3 or 4% to the 30% they'll need to win. So it's a challenge. I think that the Toronto candidates will need to look elsewhere. And if I'm not elected as leader, one of the places they should look is in this riding here, Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke, because we're definitely a winnable riding. We came close last time. As I mentioned earlier, we had 26% of the vote. And so I would suggest that if one of the Toronto candidates wins, they come out here and campaign here. I would be happy to knock on doors with them. I've knocked on doors in 3 losing elections. This probably isn't something I should advertise, but not just in 2019 when we were a close second, but I campaigned on doors here, thousands of doors during the referendum on proportional representation. And I also campaigned in this riding in 2015 as the candidate. So there's a real potential to win this riding, partly because when I knock on doors now, some people say to me, "Are you here again?" And that's a really good sign when people start recognizing you on the doorstep. Thanks for the question, Craig.
All right. So the next question is from Kate Chung. She asks, Saanich is leading in Canada requiring that apartments be adaptable for people with disabilities. 22% of Canadians have a disability, and lots of us are getting older. There is no law mandating that housing be accessible. What will you do to ensure that new housing is required to be accessible and have a universal design?
Kate, that's a tough question because the standards around housing for disabled people and for housing design are set by the provincial government. So it's a little bit tricky for the federal government, but we do have a role in the federal government, and that's through the spending power of the federal government. It brought in a national housing strategy about 4 years ago, the Liberals did, but they didn't put any money behind their housing strategy. And I believe the housing strategy actually isn't too bad if they would only fund it. And let's fund it in a way that systematically enables builders to build according to standards that meet the needs of disabled people. So wider doors and more accessible door handles and all the rest of it, which you know better than I do, Kate, and make sure that the federal government says, we have money to back this up. But as a condition of our spending, you must meet these minimum standards. And in that way, the federal government can actually influence what happens provincially. That's how I see it happening, is through the spending power, Kate.
All right. Kate, did you want to follow up on that at all? You'll just need to unmute your mic.
Yeah, we had a petition presented in the House of Commons in 2018, and the response from the government was, oh, it's the province's problem or the municipalities. But we know there's a national building code, there's a national accessibility law now, and the housing strategy. The federal government's responsible for Indigenous housing, military housing, and CMHC has a huge influence. So I agree it has to do with the spending power, and I want not one more penny of my tax dollars to build any housing that is not accessible to people with disabilities, because people with disabilities pay taxes.
I think that's a great point, Kate. I used to work with the Safety Standards Appeal Board. I was a Ministry of Attorney General lawyer here in Victoria, and one of the tribunals I worked with very closely was the Safety Standards Appeal Board. And they had a wonderful chair who was an advocate for exactly what you said. He said, BC is leading the way, like you mentioned in your question. Saanich is a good example. And we need the whole country to rise to British Columbia standards. He was a real advocate for protecting disabled people. And also he was a real environmental advocate. He was saying we have to raise standards on the environmental impact of housing in British Columbia. And it does take leadership to make these changes. And I totally agree that there is a federal role here, and you've mentioned them, so thank you.
I mean, one point I want to make is, where the heck do they think disabled people are living? In the back bedroom on the farm?
That's it, yeah. Times have changed, and the regulations and the legislation has to change with it. It's exactly right.
All right, thanks, Kate. We'll go to the next question. It's from Gabrielle Bouchard. What is your opinion on Canada's recent gun ban?
Gabrielle, I'm actually a supporter of the federal gun legislation. I'm a little bit concerned that the devil's in the details when it comes to federal legislation. I know this. I worked at the Department of Justice in the Deputy Minister's office in Ottawa when Alan Rock was our minister, and he brought in the first really major gun control legislation in the Chrétien years. And it was a mess. And a lot of the problem was in the details, in how the gun registry worked and how it didn't work in the end and how expensive it was. So I'm quite concerned, and this is something that our caucus, I know, is watching very carefully. Key questions include what guns are being grandfathered. So what guns will actually escape and be still in people's homes and cupboards and so on? By that, I'm hoping it's locked cupboards with trigger controls. But I do think it is important for us, especially in our urban centers, to bring in stricter gun control. The gun that was used by Marc Lépine in Montreal in the Polytechnic massacre has now been banned by the Liberals through this new round of gun control, and I think that was the right thing to do. It was a mini Ruger 14. So the bottom line, I don't want to get into too much detail, is I am a fan of gun control. I've worked on it as a lawyer in government back in Alan Rock's day, and I think it's very important for our country. I do recognize that it's a divisive issue, especially in rural areas. There are people who are very concerned about restricting their ability to protect themselves and protect their livestock and so on. And it's been a divisive issue inside the Greens. We had a Green MP named Bruce Heyer from Thunder Bay, who was in a caucus of 2 with Elizabeth May, and they actually split in terms of voting on conservative gun control legislation. And you know what? I respect that diversity. I think diversity is one of our core values. And if the party members haven't spoken about an issue, then we should allow our members of parliament to vote their conscience. And Bruce felt this isn't good for my constituents in Thunder Bay, a very rural riding that he's in, and he voted against. So I respect that, but personally, I'm a gun control fan. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, David.
All right, the next question is from Rose Shim. I've seen op-eds in the Globe and Mail from the oil and gas lobby trying to position these industries as the best and only economic response to COVID recovery. What do you think is the best way to counter that argument?
So I was born in Alberta. I have many family members in Alberta. My daughter works in Calgary at Foothills Hospital as a young doctor. And I have, cousins who depend on the fossil fuel industry for their livelihood. So I'm very sympathetic to people who say we have to be careful of the workers who depend on this, the families who depend on the fossil fuel industry. But I would say that the recovery from the pandemic is the perfect opportunity for Albertans to look at the future of their economy, for Canadians to build a future for our economy that's very different from this fossil fuel economy that's been so important to us over the years. And Alberta itself is leading in many ways. The town of Raymond, Alberta, has gone entirely solar in its municipal infrastructure. The town of Hinton, Alberta, is leading Canada in terms of developing geothermal energy from orphan oil wells. So, and also Alberta is leading the way on getting off coal. When Rachel Notley was premier, they negotiated a just transition plan, which is the model for the Green Party just transition plan, to move off coal and other fossil fuels and onto renewables. We will need to build an east-west electrical grid, and this is part of the post-pandemic economy. This is the largest job creation project in Canadian history, building an east-west electrical grid powered by renewables. It's really a story of hope, of economic renewal, and of deep transformation in how our economy will work. And I think the Greens need to get out there with these kinds of positive messages saying, we realize our economy is stalled and we have a plan, and it's a green plan, and it will move us off fossil fuels within the next 3, 5, maybe 7 years, depending on how fast we move. And it will enable Canada to become a leader, not a laggard internationally. That's what I would be saying on that question.
Rose, did you want to jump in here?
Sure. I guess as a follow-up, I think and I worry that that lobby is going to go hard and use every trick they can, including fake news and misinformation and everything else they can do to make their point across. So what do you think is the best way to get a green message out there when I think they're already a little bit ahead of the game? Yeah, Rose, fear works very well, especially in these times when people are already nervous about the pandemic and very anxious about our economy. The sort of fear-mongering rhetoric that we see south of the border, especially in the President of the United States,
is one political tactic that has proven to be effective in the past. But I think it's really important for the Greens to stay on the high road, to build a hopeful, positive message, but also a really credible message. When we say to my cousin in Alberta, you know, we have a plan on how you can go to Northern Alberta Institute of Technology and put your welding skills to use by adapting from welding pipelines to welding solar panels. And this is how welders will work in the new world of geothermal power. And we have a specific plan to help you pay for that. You will not have to pay for that education because the Greens are campaigning and have always campaigned on free tuition for trade school, college, and university. And then we say, and during that transition time, you will also get a guaranteed livable income. And you will not have to worry about feeding your kids or driving them to hockey, because you will have a guaranteed livable income. And again, we've been campaigning on this since 1983. These are core ideas for us. And not only that, we know how much these programs cost, and we've got them costed out, and we know how we're going to pay for them. And we've asked the parliamentary budget officer to review this. So we need a really credible, positive, hopeful message to overcome what you're saying, Rose, is the very effective lobbying, sort of a tactile communications we see, not just from the fossil fuel industry, but also from the Kenney government. They're spending $2 million a year right now. It used to be, I think it was 20 million. They cut the budget because of COVID-19 for a propaganda unit inside the Alberta government. It's quite shocking how they're spending taxpayer money. So we're up against it, Rose. I totally recognize it. And we need a leader who's positive, who has a clear idea of where we're going, really understands the Green Party platform inside and out, and who can advocate for it in both official languages.
All right, thanks, Rose. All right, next to Joseph Shupak. As party leader, will you talk more about electric bikes or electric cars?
That is the first time I've been asked that question. And to be honest, I've always talked about electric cars and I've never talked about electric bikes. But I'm guessing from this question that you're saying we should be talking more about electric bikes. Is that correct? Have I made the right guess there?
Yeah, great guess.
So what should I be saying about electric bikes, Joseph?
Well, I would talk. Well, I like that they're great. They're more economical and fun.
That's great. You know what? I'm going to have to revise my rhetoric because that's something that's been missing from my arsenal. And it's a very positive story. I really like that. Did you want to elaborate, or did you want to elaborate on that?
No, I don't have any elaboration, but I appreciate that you've accepted that.
Yeah, I have to confess, it's not something that I've said before and I should look into it. We live along a main thoroughfare right in front of my window behind this computer, and we're seeing more and more electric bikes whizzing by. It's actually very noticeable, and we've noticed the pickup during COVID-19. And what it is, I think, is people don't want to go on public transit. They're just worried about, you know, being packed into a bus or something. So we've really noticed that it's increased a lot in the last 3 months or so. And so I can see what you're saying. This is the future in many ways. And Victoria and Saanich, where I live, has a very, very good bike network. So that goes along with the electric bike advocacy is bike networks, so that riders have safe spaces to ride in. Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, the next question is from Tim Marskell. What energy mix do you envision for Canada and how best to get it to the grid? Do you see a role for nuclear?
I really see a strong role for renewables like solar, geothermal, run-of-river hydro, even in certain provinces like Quebec, and large-scale hydro, if it's done carefully. For nuclear, though, that's a much trickier question. It's a divisive question for Greens. There are Greens on both sides of the issue. And I myself am not convinced that we can bring on stream new nuclear quickly enough, safely enough, and in a cost-effective way when you compare it to the cost of other renewables. I am open-minded. In other words, I'm willing to see the data on whether new forms of nuclear power can be brought on quickly, cost effectively, and safely. But I haven't seen that data yet. So what I would say, especially if we're using public money, Greens have a tradition of being very, very careful with our promises and with how we say we're going to spend public money. And I would say before we commit to public support for nuclear, we should really see the evidence. And I don't see it yet. I see a lot of countries in the world, including Germany, with very, very forward-looking plans for entirely running their economies on renewable energy and without nuclear power. It's difficult, and the Germans are having trouble getting off coal, but they just came out with a plan this week on how they're going to do it by 2030. And I think that's the example of leaders in the world, and we should be following the German example. If you have a follow-up, I'm glad to elaborate.
Yeah, I will follow up a little bit. I'm going to try and ask this question. I don't know if I'll get to ask it of every candidate because I picked it because it's divisive and wanted to see, how you might respond to something that divides the party a little bit. And I guess the only follow-up, even though it's slightly out of scope for a Green Party leader in Canada, we need power for 40 million Canadians. I'm also concerned about 4 billion people in Asia that need power. And if it's a choice between coal and nuclear, I would probably pick nuclear, overseas. So having the brain power and the technology to do that is something we could contribute to. And I'm wondering, how that could be part of the green vision a little bit while still paying attention to all of those other concerns, the concerns about safety, the concerns about public money, and everything else that you're saying. So that's more a statement than a question, but that's kind of what I have in mind when I ask the question.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It is a divisive issue. And one of the key things I think in this leadership race is figuring out how we remain open to each other as candidates. We have 9 fantastic candidates, and I would love to be the leader that unites them together on October 4th. That's when we'll find out who wins. The evening of October 4th and morning of October 5th should be a time of bringing all the candidates together and saying we all have a big job to do, and it'll be much easier to do it if we work together. I'd love to be a person who unites the other candidates. And so especially on these sensitive issues like nuclear, Israel, Palestine, and a few other really sensitive topics, I think it's important not to be wishy-washy, but to be willing to listen and to be really thinking carefully about how we pull people together. And some people say it's a cop-out to say, well, I want to see the data, I want to see the evidence, but I really think that's core to the Green Party, is we are a science-driven party. We're an evidence-driven party. And if something isn't clear, if we're not sure that it's the right step, then we should make sure we really look into the best data, look into the best science for nuclear, look into the best engineering science and the best cost estimates. And I agree that Canada, it would be wonderful if Canada could be a leader, and we do have a history with the CANDU reactors of being a leader on nuclear, but this is one of those questions that we really need to get right. And because it's so divisive, I handled it really carefully. But thanks for the question, Tim. Yeah.
All right, the next question is from Adam Deutsch. To date, the Green Party has been most successful in smaller cities, Victoria, Nanaimo, Fredericton, Guelph, etc. How can we make breakthroughs in those big cities like Montreal, Vancouver, and Toronto?
Thank you, Adam. A lot of it, I think, is about our credibility as a party. And I think in the big cities, people are watching us very carefully. They're looking at the leader. They're wondering, is this a credible person? They're looking at our polling numbers and they say, where are they polling? Are they polling under 10%? Well, that doesn't look like a credible party to me. And they're also going to look at their own ridings and the candidates in their own ridings. They're going to say, do I like this candidate? Does this candidate reflect my riding? Is this candidate from my riding? Is this candidate somebody who reflects the diversity of Canada? I think there are a whole bunch of different variables that go into how people vote. And in big cities, because the overall message crosses boundaries very easily, it's really important for our messaging, for our advertising to be consistent, clear, compelling, And also, it has to resonate with most people. And I look back at our 2019 campaign, and I think our messaging really let us down. We were talking about abortion way too much. We had about a week of news stories on our position on abortion. At the start of the campaign, some of you might remember there was an issue around racists from New Brunswick joining the Greens, right? There was no story there. Elizabeth did her best to address it. But again, we were distracted for probably 4 days. We had a separatist running for us in Quebec, and that was another distraction. So there were a series of distractions throughout the campaign, some of them orchestrated by the NDP, and we need to be ready for that. That negative attack-style politics, we weren't ready for it in 2019, and we need a clear, consistent, strong message. We need excellent candidates who understand what we're campaigning on. We're a pro-choice party. If you're a candidate, you can't be saying, well, I'm not sure about choice in abortion. We need really spokespeople who are recognized in their community. One of the great things about this leadership race is we have such regional diversity. You know, from coast to coast to coast, we have compelling, credible candidates. Let's make sure they run for us. And let's make sure that the media in the big cities know who are our candidates who can be spokespeople for the interests of those cities. So those are some of the elements of the solution. The last thing I'll say, if we're at 1.1 million votes after the next election, we haven't done our job. That means we're under 10%. We need, with 2 weeks to go to election day, to be up in the polls around 10, 15, ideally higher percent of Canadians saying, yes, we could vote Green. What happens to us so often is we go up and up and up before elections, and then 2 weeks from election day, we start to slide. That's what happened in my riding. We were ahead in the polls. We thought we were on the right track. The NDP brought in some negative advertising. Our national numbers started to slip, and then we lost here. So I think it's really important in large centers and small, like Victoria and Saanich, that we build our party so that we're credible across the country, and we go from 1.1 million votes to 2 in the next campaign. That's my answer, Adam. If you have a follow-up, I'm delighted to follow up.
Yeah, I guess there's a few things we encounter at the door. The most common one, of course, is vote splitting and the fear of helping conservatives by voting Green. I think a second concern, often perhaps, I don't know how to phrase this, perhaps coming from the NDP, is that the Green Party is a right-wing party and that we're not interested in social justice, although social justice is one of the core Green values. And I think there's also a concern about a lack of diversity among Green candidates. So I think those are the three things that, I mean, and actually, to be honest, in the last election, if you went to the Green Party website, you'd be hard pressed to find a face that was not of European origin.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I keep saying, Adam, that we have to have candidates who reflect the diversity of their riding and the diversity of Canada. And I see that as a leadership responsibility. I'm a real fan of implementing a diversity program that starts at the top with co-leadership. So we don't have just one leader, but like New Zealand, like Germany, like Alberta Greens recently, we bring in a co-leadership model. So we build in diversity right at the top of our party. And then we have an integrated plan for diversity through our federal council, through all our candidates. And I see the leader as the key person responsible for delivering on diversity. My plan on day 4, day 5, after winning the leadership on October 4th, would be to drive across the country in an electric vehicle and reach out at the riding level to recruit new members who represent the full diversity of Canada into turning them into active volunteers, but also candidates to make sure that our candidates really reflect the city they live in. And this is, as you mentioned, especially important in large cities. And I see that as a personal responsibility of the leader to get out there on the ground and do that kind of recruitment, because it is an Achilles heel for us in our campaigns if we don't fully reflect Canada. And this isn't Elizabeth May's fault. She's a fantastic leader. She's done what she can, but we also need the other candidates in this race to stay on and to be part of that. Because the political science data is clear. If a woman asks another woman to run, that woman is much more likely to accept, especially if the second call is from the leader of the party. And so I'd love to work with this very diverse group of leadership candidates, create a united team where we work together to recruit people from all communities across Canada. So especially our candidate pool really reflects Canada. That takes organization. And one of the things I've done in my life is deep transformational change in organizations, specifically the justice system. Any of you who have been involved with the justice system know that judges and lawyers are not necessarily the people who first embrace deep transformational change. But that's what I did the last 10 years of my career, was driving deep transformational change into the justice system in British Columbia against a lot of resistance, including from my own bosses inside the Ministry of Attorney General, and especially from senior judges and lawyers. So it takes somebody who understands deep organizational change to lead it. And it takes somebody who can unite this team of fantastic leadership candidates together so that we push this deep transformational change in our party. We need deep change in terms of diversity. On the other issues you mentioned, I'll be very brief. That's a long answer because I care a lot about this issue of diversity. But on the other questions on strategic voting, it really depends riding by riding. Like when I campaigned in Guelph for Mike Schreiner, we managed to bring over a lot of conservatives by saying, who would you rather have, Mike Schreiner, the Green, or the NDP candidate? And almost, I'd say 95% of conservatives said, well, we don't like either one of you, but if we have to choose, we're going to vote Green. And then we'd say, well, would you like a sign? And you wouldn't believe it. We put up so many signs on conservative lawns because they liked Mike Schreiner and because they knew him. Another secret to success in urban areas and rural is having a candidate who's willing to run a couple of times. I mentioned before, I've campaigned 3 times through this riding, and people start to know you. They recognize your name. And if we can build that in so that candidates are able to sustain campaigns between elections, so it's not just like a 3-month campaign. We started knocking on doors in December 2018, and we knocked all the way through till October. And this was my 3rd time knocking on doors throughout our whole riding. That's how we win. It's a lot of work. You know, politics is 95% perspiration, 5% inspiration, and that's how Greens need to win. Thank you for the question, Adam. Bit of a long answer.
All right, the next question is from Michel Sigouin Mirabel. Do you think about, or what do you think about the anti-carbon tax stickers in Ontario?
I think the carbon tax is problematic because of the 3-letter word at the end of it, tax. And we have in the Green Party a much better platform, which is the carbon fee and dividend. It really is a carbon tax, but I think we have to be very careful how we sell this. And the carbon fee and dividend is a fantastic way of selling it because we can emphasize the dividend part where we're giving back to Canadians. And one of the ideas I really like, Michelle, is integrating our guaranteed livable income platform with our carbon fee and dividend platform, and saying that the dividend is going to come back as part of this guaranteed livable income. And we're going to have one program, very simple to administer, much less red tape, much less bureaucracy, across the board, fair to all Canadians. And that dividend is coming back as part of our carbon fee and dividend program. Selling this is very difficult. In BC, actually, the carbon tax was called a carbon tax, and it was sold very well by saying government will make sure it's revenue neutral. So we're imposing a carbon tax, but we're going to cut other taxes. And the Auditor General is going to audit this to make sure that the numbers add up. So they had a smart way of selling the tax. I think the Greens have an even smarter way, especially if we team it up with guaranteed livable income, which, by the way, I think is going to be, should be, a key platform plank for us. If you look at the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, it's more expensive than a carbon tax. It's full of holes. Justin Trudeau is always walking out to the microphone, trying to patch the holes in the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. The great thing about guaranteed livable income, it's across the board, it's fair to everybody, it's easy to administer relative to other programs like the CERB. And I think that should be a key plank in our next platform, is we're running on something that really makes sense, it's less expensive, and it's also connected to saving the planet because it's part of the dividend from the carbon fee and dividend. Michel, j'espère que ça répond à ta question. Merci.
All right. We have just a comment from Mina Lee Johnston. She says that she's a senior and a daughter of a Canadian pioneer family, and she's been listening on all the candidates. And David, she's decided to support you because you are truly experienced in so many areas, and she finds you to be easy on her ears, and she likes to listen to you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that comment. Very kind of you. That's unusual. We don't get those kinds of comments on these Zoom calls. Most people are quite discreet and careful. So I really appreciate you stepping up there, Minely. Thank you. Are there any other comments like that? No.
Not that I can see, but I'll let you know. All right. So the next question is from Wilma Spence. What do you see as Canada's role on the international scene?
Thank you, Wilma. I see us as becoming a leader on addressing the climate emergency, the country that shows exactly how to transform our economy, how to transform how the government administers its programs so that we take on the climate emergency with both hands. And we transform our economy by moving off fossil fuels and onto renewables. We create the biggest job creation program in Canadian history through an east-west electrical grid. If you were on earlier when I did my introduction, this is part of it. I really want to see Canada as a leader on the climate emergency. And I think we can see from the Security Council vote that happened 2 weeks ago that Canada isn't seen around the world as a leader anymore. We seem to be a country that tends to talk a lot and doesn't deliver. And that's been the real problem with the Trudeau government. Lots of great talk about a feminist foreign policy and so on, but a failure to deliver in terms of foreign aid, for example. In 2015, the Liberals campaigned and said they would put into foreign aid 1% of our gross domestic product. And now, you know, we are putting in as a percentage of our GDP less than when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, and he was cutting foreign aid. So I think people can see that. They don't believe Canada anymore, and we need to fix that.
Wilma, did you have a follow-up question? Oh.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. So that's it for the questions in the chat box. Did anybody else want to raise their hands and ask a question through video? Adam.
Yeah, it's getting darker and darker here, so I don't know if you can see my hand go up. I have it seems as though it was a long time ago, but late last year, there was a movement in France called the Gilets jaunes, and that started off basically as a anti-carbon tax movement. And I saw some parallels between that and Doug Ford's campaign in Ontario. And I think it's kind of easy to condemn it, but I also think about the underlying causes. Like, to my mind, after the Second World War, our entire society became built around the automobile. And people were moving out from the center of the city. Their automobile allowed us to live in sprawled out spaces. And then later in the 20th century, it's actually become very expensive to live in the centers of cities. So in Canadian cities, they're sort of like, at least in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, living in the center of the city is much more expensive than living in the suburbs. And so poor people have sort of been driven out from the center. And like, I can go everywhere on bicycle, but to live where I live is expensive. And so on the one hand, so I was thinking that basically, like, the frustration that people feel is that they can't afford to live in city centers, so they're pushed out to the suburbs, and in the suburbs you're forced to own an automobile, and then here come these environmentalists who want to attack fossil fuels. So it's, I don't know if I'm being coherent here at all. It's just that I think I kind of feel that we need to somehow discuss the root cause, which was we've sort of been sold a bill of goods with the automobile-oriented society, and a lot of people with lower economic means have been forced out into places where they can't really live a low carbon footprint lifestyle. So I just want to have your thoughts on that sort of fundamental problem.
Yeah, I do see that as a fundamental problem. And I think you're right. In France, that's very true of big cities like Paris, where it's so expensive to live downtown. And I also see it in the United States too. The fact that Trump did so well in the last election in the United States was a real surprise to me. This sort of anger, this sense of being left behind, this sense that things aren't fair. And we'll vote for a guy like Trump just to express our dissatisfaction. I think it's the same kind of thing as with the Gilets jaunes, and the same thing with the Brexit referendum. So I think you're onto something, Adam. I think there's a real sense that, you know, things aren't working for us anymore. And the answer to that is not easy, because I think it's quite deep, and it's easy to do what Rob Ford did, Premier Ford did now, with sort of easy promises like buck a beer, remember that? And, you know, for Trump, it's build the wall. I think that kind of populist politics is really an unhealthy way at it, but it's tapping into this sense of anger and exclusion. So the Greens need to figure that out. As a party, we really need to figure out how to connect. And we have very, very good policy. Like, to deal with these problems you mentioned, public transit is a critical part of the solution, right? And enabling people to leave their cars behind and get on to convenient, speedy, clean public transit is really critical. But public transit often doesn't resonate as well as buck a beer, right? That's a more complicated story. It requires a major investment of public funds. And so getting there is harder. And I don't have a simple answer on that, Adam. I think you're putting your finger on something that's really important. For the Greens, I think a key thing relates to the very first question that was asked by Ian this evening, which was, how do you engage with voters on why Greens are different, why we're special? And I think a way to do that is to say the old line parties have consistently said one thing and done another, especially the Liberals. The NDP have done that here in British Columbia. They claim to be environmentalists and then put $6.6 billion into the fossil fuel industry to build the fracking industry. So I think we could talk about ethics, integrity, doing the right thing. And I do think our electoral platform, if it's explained in a clear, simple, consistent way, will resonate with people. But it is difficult because we're not the party of buck a beer. That's, you know, not how we do politics. So it is a really important thing, I believe, to have a leader who's seen as credible, sincere, somebody who connects with people in an open, honest way. A lot of this is driven by television politics and leadership politics. So the choice we face in terms of selecting our leader is really a critical choice. It has to be somebody who can connect with the people you mentioned, Adam, out in the suburbs, people who feel sort of disenfranchised. And that's a critical test of leadership, is can you connect in English and in French with people in Montreal and Toronto and Vancouver, and especially in those big centers. It's increasingly people who speak other languages as their first language. And so do we have a team around us that's really ready to connect and willing to put in the time to connect with the diverse communities in those parts of our country? It's a bit of a long answer again, but that's my best shot at it, Adam. It's a very difficult question.
Hello?
Yes.
Can I add something to Adam?
Yes.
Here in Montreal, there's the teleworking that make a lot of progress, and there's less cars on the road 30% less cars with the teleworking. And I think that business, that's a way to reduce carbon.
Yeah. Michelle, I totally agree. I was a public service manager for many years, and in the last 10 years especially, I was able to get almost all my staff to work from home the majority of the time. And it made for a very effective staff as long as they were closely managed. Some of them had to be very closely managed. But once they got used to it, we had excellent performance, a much better environmental footprint, and much happier staff. They would love to come into the office and see each other every couple of weeks for our bi-weekly staff meetings. And my wife here in Saanich worked from here, from this room actually, back to Ottawa for 15 years, writing legal opinions. She worked by phone and computer. Sometimes she had to go back to Ottawa, but very rarely. So I think that's the way of the future. Enabling people to work from home is part of this solution, so we can get away from the difficult commutes. And this relates to Kate's question as well. The federal government has a leadership role to play here with its own public servants and the military and others that are under federal jurisdiction to lead the way on telework, work from home, distance work. And COVID-19 has been a tragedy, but there's some really important learning in terms of how we can use technologies like this one we're on tonight, Zoom, and other technologies to help people stay home, help them avoid these brutal commutes, especially in Vancouver. People are sometimes commuting 2-3 hours because of real estate prices so outrageously disproportionate to salaries. And that's part of the solution, I agree. I think we have time maybe for one last question. We're at 25 to, and does anybody want to ask one final question before
I just want to add something else. It's why that the Wi-Fi is very important everywhere in Canada.
Yes, totally agree. British Columbia has a huge rate of uptake in Wi-Fi. There are some rural communities and some Indigenous communities, especially in the north, that aren't connected, but the provincial government here is really invested in broadband. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. And there's no national broadband strategy, but rural Canadians and people who live far from city centers would really benefit from that. All right, how about if I just give my closing 2 or 3 minutes? Anybody who wants to stay on is welcome to stay on after that. I'll stay on until the last question, but this will give us a chance to conclude.
Sorry, David, can I just, it's not a question, but Gabby left a message in the chat box that I'd like to draw everyone's attention to, because part of the reason we're doing this, as I said at the beginning, is that we want to think locally, think globally, act locally. And this leadership race is exciting for many reasons. And one of them is it's a good opportunity to build the engagement locally. So Gabby left her email address in the chat box. If you'd like to join our meetings and get involved in our planning activities, please contact Gabby. And and also thank you very much, David and Amanda, for making time for us. Actually, this is one of the silver linings of the pandemic. I don't think you would have been able to travel so much without these Zoom meetings.
That's exactly right. And I want to thank you, Adam, and thank the whole team, Amanda for hosting this meeting and everybody else who advertised it and made it possible for us to come together. Thank you to everybody. It is much easier to do these meetings on Zoom. I traveled in February and March from here in BC to Calgary, Regina, Winnipeg, Thunder Bay. Then I hopped across to Ottawa, went to Montreal, and then was working my way back towards you in Toronto when we got hit by COVID-19. And I was feeling the trip. It's a big country, and being able to do these calls on Zoom is really valuable. And that would be part of my plan as leader, is I plan to continue these Zoom calls. My plan is to meet with EDA chief executive officers every 2 weeks through Zoom, to meet with past candidates and then new candidates once we start our nomination meetings, and really create a national connection. As Michel said in his question earlier, if we can use our technology to connect people, let's do it. And the Green Party should really be building, I think, through online training, direct contact with the leader, and inspiring people to come into our party. And what I offer in this race, and I'll just conclude by saying this, is deep, deep experience in winning politics, in building winning campaign teams. I've campaigned on winning campaigns in New Brunswick and Quebec and Ontario, British Columbia with Paul Manley. We really do know how to win campaigns. It's a lot about hard work, as I mentioned earlier. It's about candidates really willing to start knocking on doors very early. It's about choosing candidates who reflect the full diversity of Canada and choosing them early so they can engage their family, their friends, their work colleagues, their neighbors, and get this movement of movements going. Now, let's connect up, not just with Extinction Rebellion and the Friday Climate Strikers. Those are key allies of ours. But let's reach out to new partners like Black Lives Matter and Wet'suwet'en Strong. What we need is a leader who's able to lead the leaders and get our fantastic candidates, the other 8 candidates together on election night, pull together and put them to work as leaders, empower them. And when they want help, be there for them. But if they don't want help, stay back. And I think we can pull together a fantastic dynamic team. And the campaign teams from each of those campaigns are amazing too. So let's go get those campaign teams working. And let's build this connected movement of movements in 338 ridings across Canada from the ground up by empowering our volunteers. I have experience doing that. I've worked in deep change in the justice system for many years, transformational change that resulted in people flying in from Singapore, Australia, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canadian jurisdictions to figure out how did BC crack the code on justice transformation. And the way we did it was partly by empowering others, partly by looking around the world to where the best ideas were. So even in this call today, we mentioned Germany and its plan to move off fossil fuels and onto renewables. It just issued its plan 2 weeks ago. Let's follow Germany on that plan and build a better plan. Because ultimately, I believe that Canada can be a leader and we can stop being the climate action laggard if we have the right people leading the party and if we have the right strategy, somebody who can understand Greens in his bones. I was shadow cabinet critic for justice, shadow cabinet critic for democratic renewal. I understand how the Green Party works at all levels, not just on the ground here in Esquimalt-Saanich with our EDA, not just with campaigns across the country, federally, provincially, and municipally. But I understand how the federal council works and how our shadow cabinet works because I've been there at those tables. So that's what I bring to this race. I see myself as somebody who's a builder, somebody who really listens carefully, somebody who's able to unite Greens from all parts of our party, from the eco-socialists and the socialists in Montreal to the fiscal conservatives in Ottawa and to the people who are saying we have to defund the police in Vancouver. These are all fantastic people with diverse ideas, but what we need is a leader who can unite them. That's what I offer. I really appreciate everybody coming on. I'm happy to stay on until the last question, but those of you who have to leave, thank you for coming. Go to davidmerner.com to click on join the party if you want to get involved in our campaign, or donate. No amount is too small. The maximum is $1,625. So anywhere between $0 and $1,625 is very welcome as a donation. And thank you again for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Amanda, you're able to click mute all if you want.
Oh, yeah.
But I think we're good.
All right.
Thanks again, Amanda and David.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, it's very good. It's very energizing.
Yeah.
In these times where we're all so isolated.
It's great to get together like this, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks again, and we really value your time.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. So Amanda, we're on in an hour and 15 minutes for
Yep.
our next one.
Round 2. All
I
right.
really appreciate you staying up so late. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, that's really great. Yeah, I think the Victoria one, we're going to have lots of really good questions. It's going to be
Yeah.
fun to see. Yeah. Do you want to hand back the hosting to me? Are you able to do that if you go up to your name and then
Just give me a second here. How do I?
or actually, you know what? If you click on my name and then you'll see the menu pops up.
Yeah, make host.
Yes. And if you make me the host, that would be great.
Sorry about that.
No, this is really good.
All right.
I'll get a box that comes up and then I can become the host. And
Okay, great. I
did
see
you click?
there are a few people who have stuck around.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions or? Nope. That's, people are leaving gradually.
Okay. I recorded the video to the cloud, David.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's really good. That's,
Okay.
so we are now down to family and friends. Dad and Dad, you're welcome to unmute if you want. And I just wanted to remove everybody who I didn't know so we could chat. Dad, can you hear me? He might not actually be on either.
Okay.
Doesn't look like it.
So shall we reconvene at 9:40 on the next call?
Yeah.
Can you hear me, David?
Hi, can you hear me?
I just unmuted about the first time I've ever done that.
Oh, good. Yeah. How are
Hello.
things in Indonesia?
Good. I hope you can't see me.
Nope, can't see you. Are you in your swimsuit?
Yeah, exactly.
Aha.
Well,
Okay.
shorts anyway.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that meeting. It was excellent. Amanda, thank you very much. You're a really good moderator.
Yeah. Very good job. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So David, I guess we'll all see you soon again, huh? In, you say an hour and 15 minutes.
Are you going to come back on?
Yep.
Great. That's good. All right. We'll talk to you then, maybe.
Yeah, excellent responses and well done.
Thank you. It's getting better.
Yeah, it's very thoughtful and really, I think, really good.
Great. Yeah, that question from Adam was very thoughtful question. tough
Yes.
one to answer.
Yeah. I thought a lot of the questions were really thoughtful. People are really tuning in to the new election.
Yeah, it's getting better and better with the questions.
I think so.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah. I'm interested. Anyway, we'll see you in an hour or so.
See you in an hour and 10 minutes. That sounds good.
Okay, David.
Bye.
Bye. Amanda. Bye.
Amanda, we'll see you soon, Amanda.
Yep, for
Okay.
sure. Okay, see you in a bit.
I hope you're gonna get something to eat or drink.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm gonna do is grab dinner. Yeah.
That
Did you
sounds
have
good.
your nap?
I did, but it was shortened by a call from Dan Turcott looking for a translator.
I don't know if Mireille has emailed me back. Maybe I should probably double check. Yeah.
That's cool. I think it got sorted out, but yeah, we're in the crunch time now.
Okay.
All right. Talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.